Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Seung Baek, one of the volunteers for the GIC Talk. Time certainly flies because today is the last day of May. So how was your May?
Good.
I hope you make time to look at past month to evaluate what you have accomplished and have yet to accomplish. Today's speaker is Billie Pritchett, who studied philosophy from Murray State University. He has his Master of Arts in TESOL from Murray State University. He is an English teacher at Chosun University. He will talk about fighting poverty in the 21st century. Poverty is everywhere regardless if it's a developing or developed country like Korea. He is going to talk about the current poverty problem between USA and Korea and what kinds of strategies could be used to combat poverty. Please welcome our speaker.
Well, it's really great to see you, and I have to admit I'm a little nervous to be speaking in front of you today. As the host said, my name is Billie Pritchett, and I've been an English teacher at Chosun University for over 2 years now, and I am very interested in the issue of poverty. I've been interested in the issue for maybe since I was really young. I grew up to a very poor family, and I've always been interested in different ways in which people could practically improve other people's quality of lives and their own quality of lives. So my topic today is fighting poverty in the 21st century. And here is an outline of the presentation. First, we'll talk about poverty as a deprivation. We'll talk about poverty as an issue of low income. And we'll talk about some of the things that contribute to poverty, some of the health and social problems related to poverty, what most people think about the issue of poverty, some strategies to deal with poverty, and looking forward to the future to dealing with the poverty problem. First, we'll talk about poverty as a deprivation. There was a very famous economist named Amartya Sen who in the early 1990s developed a measure for poverty, and it's called the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index measures these three features of people's lives in a country. It measures people's life expectancy in that country, the education level, and also the income level of the people within that country. One thing about this measure is it does not adjust for the differences between the rich and the poor in the country. So it's an average for what the life expectancy, education, and income for the people in that country is. So a little later, to show the difference between what the potential level of development was within a country, and then show what the actual level was within a country, they developed the IHDI. It's also called the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index. So the IHDI measures the potential for human development in a country, and the IHDI measures the actual level of human development in a country for all the citizens. I'll show you what this looks like whenever you think about it practically, comparing the human development, the level of good education, the level of income, and the life expectancy for the countries. So for example here, the potential for human development for the United States is number 3, ranked number 3 in the world. This is a very good sign for America and its potential for development for all its citizens. And if you look here, Korea is ranked number 12 in the world, and this is a great ranking for potential human development. Whenever you look at the differences between the rich and the poor in the countries, then the overall development for the people in the country actually falls. So now you see that the United States is here. It's almost at the bottom of the 20, and Korea is no longer in the top 20. So in summary, even developed societies like the United States and Korea have large differences between the citizens' potential for a full life, an adequate education, and adequate income, and the actual capacities to reach these measures. I'm not going to be talking about poverty in terms of educational problems or in terms of life expectancy for the citizens in the country. We're only going to zero in this talk about the issue of low income for the developed countries, and particularly focusing on the United States and some information as well about Korea. Here is poverty across an American's lifetime. According to the data in 2003, this measure in 2003, by age 20, 10.6% of the American population will have lived at least a year below the poverty line, and by age 60, 48.2% will have lived below the poverty line. So almost half of people will have lived below the poverty line by age 60 in America. Talking about living near the official poverty line, by age 20, 19.1% will live near that line, and by age 60, 64.2% will have lived near poverty, so over half. This is according to the data in 2003. And if you look at this measure, by age 60, over half will have lived near poverty. The number in 2003 was 64.2%. The number has actually increased in America over the past 10 years. Poverty is at an all-time high now. It's at 79%. 4 out of 5 U.S. adults struggle with joblessness, near poverty, or reliance on welfare. This number is projected to increase by 2030. By 2030, based on the current trend of widening income inequality, close to 85% of all working-age adults in the U.S. will experience bouts of economic insecurity, and this is by age 60 they will experience this. My focus so far has been on the United States, and the main reason why I'm talking about the United States in particular is, as a citizen of the United States, it's very troubling for me to read this information, and I feel in some sense a responsibility to try to do something to help the problem, or just to inform people of what the problem is. But also, as an international resident in Korea, I would like to tell you some of the information about what's going on in Korea, so you can be informed as well about that. And probably you will have heard some of this information. So, according to an article in Chosun, for the absolute poverty rate, 1 in 4 Korean households fell into the absolute poverty range for at least a year between the years of 2005 and 2009. So that's about 24%. Korea does not have as big of a problem with the absolute poverty rate as America does. As I said, America, over half will live, or about half will live below poverty, over half will live near poverty. Again, this is the absolute poverty rate in Korea. For the relative poverty rate, 1 in 3 households experience relative poverty. And what this means is the total income was less than half the median income. So the median income is 3.6 million won, or about $3,300 for a 4-person household. So this means that 1 in 3 households is living on about 1.8 million won or less. Also, there's a problem in Korea with poverty among seniors. Nearly half of Korean citizens aged 65 or older live below the poverty line. This is a picture taken in the Seoul area. I did not take this picture. This came from an article that I read in the New York Times. The number is 49.3% of seniors who are affected by poverty in Korea. So in summary, more than half of Americans will experience at least a year of living in poverty, and as many as 4/5 will live in relative poverty, and that number is expected to increase to about 85% over the next 25 years. And 1 out of 4 Korean households has experienced absolute poverty. 1 out of 3 Korean households has lived on less than 1.8 million won a month for at least a year, and almost half the Korean senior population lives below the poverty line. We'll talk a little bit about some of the contributors to poverty, and here are 4 that I've identified. There's the unemployment, there's an oversaturated job market, too many people looking for jobs and unable to find them. There's also a widening income gap between the rich citizens in the country and the poor citizens, and also there's the problem of unproductive work. We'll look at unemployment here for a moment. If you see in this New Yorker cartoon, the man says, "I've stopped looking for work," which I believe helps the economic numbers. This actually is relevant to the talk because the unemployment rate in the United States and in Korea and in other developed countries, it only measures the people who are still looking for a job. It doesn't measure the number of people who stopped looking for the job. If you look at the unemployment rate compared to the employment rate, you see a big difference. Actually, in the United States and Korea, about 40% of eligible workers are unemployed. Again, talking about this measure, the unemployment rate in Korea looks pretty good. About 3.2% people look to be unemployed. But compare this to the employment rate, and you see that for the eligible workers in Korea, 60.6% are employed, and then the other number is 39.4%. Putting the information together, actually, in terms of employed Koreans, about 60% are employed, 3.2% are unemployed and seeking jobs, and 36.2%, according to the measure, are unemployed but no longer seeking jobs, according to the official record. Similarly, for the true unemployment rate in the United States, about 59% are employed, 35% unemployed and not seeking jobs, and 6.6% unemployed and seeking jobs. There's also a problem of the oversaturated job market. To just add kind of a light moment here, at this presentation that this man's giving at the graduation ceremony, he says, "My fellow graduates, today we leave behind the trappings of youth, step boldly onto the road of life, and move back in with our parents." This is actually the case for so many people who graduate and then can't find work in their field. So American and Korean college graduates are having a difficult time finding work related to their areas of study. This is according to an article that I read in the Wall Street Journal. For new Korean job seekers, Korean companies are unable to absorb the surge in 1.2 million job seekers. These are the most recent college graduates from university. As for new American job seekers, last year the unemployment rate for ages 20 to 29 who earned a college degree was 10.9%. So 10.9% was unemployed after graduating. 260,000 college graduates work jobs at or below the federal minimum wage in the U.S. at $7.25 an hour. So a lot of people couldn't find work in their field and then worked minimum wage jobs or below that. I'll slow down for one moment and tell you a little bit about another problem. In the United States and Korea, there's also a big difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10% of the citizens in terms of rich and poor. And according to a report from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, it's kind of a group of wealthy countries. The United States is included in it, Korea is included in it, and this is a group of countries that want to do something about the poverty problem in their own countries and also worldwide. Well, according to that report, the difference between rich and poor has been steadily growing in the US and Korea. In the United States, the top 10% of American households make more than 15.8 times the lowest 10%. And in Korea, the top 10% of Korean households make 10.5 times the lowest 10%. So a large gap between the rich and the poor. Also in the OECD report about the US in particular, the richest 1% of Americans make an average of $1,300,000 after taxes. And the poorest 20% of US citizens make an average of $17,700 after taxes. Other things in the report were that people who achieve a high income status tend to stay there. Low-wage workers are actually working more hours than they did 10 years ago. They're working 20% more hours. And the richest American citizens in the US pay half the amount of income tax they were paying about 30 years ago. Another issue that contributes to poverty in the United States, Korea, and other developed countries is worker productivity. So, just looking at this chart here, actually the United States is doing pretty well in terms of worker productivity, and Korea suffers in terms of worker productivity. One of the suggestions actually is that perhaps people could work fewer hours, and then you have more skilled workers working fewer hours to deal with this work productivity gap. So some of the contributors to poverty in the US and Korea is the unemployment rate, and true unemployment is about 40% in both our countries. Millions of graduates can't find work in their field. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing in both of the countries, and worker productivity could potentially increase to make the country healthier and the economy healthier. We'll talk about some of the health and social problems that are related to poverty. Here are some of the measures for American citizens. 31% of poor Americans suffer from depression. 17.1% suffer from asthma, 31.8% suffer from obesity. High blood pressure and heart attacks were slightly higher among the poor. So across these health problems, depression, asthma, obesity, high blood pressure, and heart attacks, the poor suffer more from them than anyone who has an adequate level of income. Also, there is a social scientist named Richard Wilkinson, and he did this large measure with countries that have big differences between the rich citizens and the poor citizens. And one of the things that he found is that in countries where there is a big difference between the rich people and the poor people in that country, actually the health and the social problems are worse across all kinds of measures. So if you look at the life expectancy for the people in these countries, it's worse in more unequal countries. So is literacy, the literacy rate. Infant mortality is higher in the more unequal countries. Homicide rates are higher, and so many other measures here. You see unemployment, teenage births, issues of social trust, obesity, and also mental illness. These are all things that are much worse in countries that have a big difference between rich and poor citizens. There's also been some research that's been done on the issue of happiness or well-being and how it relates to the issue of low income. So, an economist named Daniel Kahneman did research about this, and he found that Americans who make $55,000 are 3 to 4 times less happy than those who make $75,000 or above. And Americans who make more than $75,000 are no happier than those who earn $75,000. I thought this was an interesting report. It showed that for happiness levels, $75,000 is the sweet spot. It's the minimum amount of money to maximize happiness. Interesting measure. So for health and social problems related to poverty, poor people are more likely to suffer from heart attacks, asthma, high blood pressure, depression, obesity, and live a much less happy life than people with an adequate income. Countries with great differences between rich and poor people are more likely to suffer from more serious health and social problems per person, including even the rich and the poor people in that country. As for what people think about poverty, I can tell you from a study that was done. This study was conducted for over 10,000 American citizens to find out what they thought about these social issues. And it was conducted by NPR and Kaiser Foundation, and they found that almost all Americans want government to reduce poverty. 85% of Americans support increasing the minimum wage. 80% of Americans support an increase in tax credits for low-income workers. I'll tell you about this tax credit thing. In the United States and Korea, there is money provided back to poor people after they pay their taxes, right? So you pay in your money to taxes, and then you receive some of that money back if you're below a certain level. And in America, the highest amount of money you can get back is about $6,000, and I don't know what the measure is in Korea. But there's been talk about increasing this rate to keep people out of poverty. 82% of Americans support expanding government public employment programs. So 82% of Americans would like government to help create jobs so that more people could have work. There was also an interesting study done by an economist, and his name is Daniel Ariely. And he did a survey, and he asked people, what do you think the ideal difference between the rich and the poor people should be within the United States? And if you look, what they said is they thought the ideal for the top 20% should be, about 32%. 32% I'm sorry, I should explain this a little bit more. The top 20% in the United States, they thought that they should control about 32% of the wealth, ideally. And then the bottom 20% should control about 10% of the wealth. By the way, this survey was conducted with people who were liberal, conservative, who were minorities, and it was conducted across all sorts of ethnic lines, racial lines, economic lines, and they found that it didn't really matter. The measure was about the same for everyone. They asked them to estimate what they thought the difference between the rich and the poor actually was in the United States, and most people guessed that the top 20% controlled about 55% of the wealth, and the bottom 20% controlled less than 5%. But here's the actual measure. In the United States, the richest 20% of the citizens actually have about 85% of the wealth in the country, and the bottom 20% is so low it doesn't chart. I thought it was an interesting finding. There's also been a survey conducted in USA Today where they asked people about their views about how the United States works, how the American economy works. And 60% of the people said that most people who want to get ahead can make it if they're willing to work hard. So this idea is very old in the United States, where people think if you're willing to work hard, you can get ahead. That same percentage, though, 60% said that they thought the economic system in the United States was unfairly favoring the wealthy people. They also did a study in the USA, they did a survey rather in the USA Today, and they asked people what they thought government should do about the issue of poverty, and they asked them what they thought government could do. And most people thought that government should do something to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. And most people thought that they could actually do something about making this change. So this is about what people think about poverty, and actually what a lot of American citizens want to do about the issue of poverty. Most American citizens want other citizens to have access to adequate wages. They want them to get tax rebates if they're below the poverty line. They also want more government employment programs, and they want to reduce the difference between the rich and the poor in their countries. Also, Americans view hard work as essential to achieving goals, but they also think that the American economy doesn't give equal opportunities to poor people. I'll talk now, at the end of this talk, about some strategies to address poverty. And sorry if this is very information heavy. I know that maybe this could get a little boring, and I apologize, but thank you so much for your time so far and for sticking with me. As for some of the strategies to address poverty, some of them have been at the broadest level, at the highest level, to increase the minimum wage. Also, I mentioned giving the low-wage citizens tax credits, giving them money back after they pay in their taxes. There's also the issue of hiring skilled workers to work fewer hours. Another issue is creating new jobs in government and business. And then the final one is adopting progressive taxation. And of course, what this means is that the higher the income, the more taxes you pay. The lower the income, the less taxes you pay. Here was an interesting report that was done about the minimum wage in the United States. If someone just worked and received the minimum wage, they would have a very difficult time paying their rent. If they wanted to get adequate housing and only work minimum wage, in my home state of Kentucky, they would have to work over 70 hours a week at a minimum wage job to afford rent. For New York, if someone wanted to get adequate housing, they would have to work over 124 hours to pay their rent. 124 hours a week, that is. In California, it would be about 130 hours a week. And in Washington, D.C., you would have to work 137 hours a week at minimum wage to pay your rent. This was an interesting report, I thought. So there have been issues raised in Congress about raising the federal minimum wage in the United States to $10.10 an hour by 2016. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, which is an independent organization out of Washington that just crunches all this information and tries to find out ways to improve the poverty problem and to raise the wages, they found that it would benefit 27.8 million workers if they raised the minimum wage. They also found that it would grow the economy in America to $22 billion, and it would make 85,000 new jobs. Another recommendation that I mentioned earlier is, in the United States, there's the Earned Income Tax Credit, and it's money back for low-income working families. Actually, Korea has this too. People who are kept above the poverty line because of this money back after taxes was 10.1 million Americans, and it saved 5.3 million children from suffering below the poverty line. I'll skip this slide, but I'll just say that about this issue, another issue that's been raised to solve as a strategy to deal with the poverty problem is more skilled workers working fewer hours. And I'll skip this slide. Another issue that's been raised is creating new jobs in government and business. The idea here is that maybe the government could give more incentives so that new jobs could be created when they wouldn't have been created before. And actually, most Americans support this. So 85% of Americans support providing tax cuts to small businesses. 75% support additional funds for teachers and firefighters, police officers. 73% support tax breaks to companies who hire people who've been unemployed for more than 6 months. And you can look at the other measures here. Some also support extending the unemployment insurance benefits and providing additional funds for public works projects. Also, most Americans actually support progressive taxation. Most Americans would actually like if there is a scaled tax system where the poor citizens pay less and the richer citizens pay more. There was a bill proposed by President Obama in 2011 that would have provided an opportunity to make it where the poorer citizens pay less in taxes and the richer citizens pay more in taxes. Also, the bill included measures to create jobs where the jobs wouldn't have been created before. So you see here that 70% of Americans support increasing taxes on corporations, and 66% support increasing the income tax on individuals who make $200,000 or more. But in spite of the support, the overwhelming support from American citizens, the U.S. Senate rejected the proposal. I'll skip this slide. Here are some of the strategies to address poverty. Some suggested strategies for dealing with the poverty issue have been increasing the minimum wage, giving tax rebates to poor people, making the work week shorter but with more and better skilled workers, creating new jobs in government and business, and adopting a progressive taxation system. And all of these things, the majority of Americans support. So, about looking forward here, one of the issues that comes up and that I think that everyone struggles with is that there's the issue about who deserves what in providing money to poor people. The psychologist Steven Pinker says that most people don't oppose helping the poor out of greed, but out of a sense of fairness. And what he means here is there are some times where it's very difficult to decide who deserves the money and who doesn't deserve the money. So it's very difficult to give the money to support the deserving poor as opposed to the people who are undeserving of the money. That is an issue. But they asked most American citizens what they thought about why people become poor, and more Americans said that people become poor in America because of circumstances beyond their control than because of a lack of effort. More Americans also said that people become rich in the United States because they had more advantages in life than most other people. This is a survey from the USA Today. So a question comes up that if so many citizens really want to fight poverty and in these specific ways, then why hasn't there been any change in public policy in the United States? I remember reading fairly recently a surprising news headline, and this is what I read. According to a study that was reported in Washington Times, and I couldn't believe that it said it, but it said that ordinary American citizens have no direct influence over public policy. I read the study that they reported in the Washington Times, and I'm giving you some of the big quotes here so you can see just how strange the information is. But according to the research, the richest American individuals and organized interest groups play a substantial part in affecting public policy, but this is a quote from the paper: the general public has little or no independent influence. Another quote from the paper is, when the preferences of economic elites, like the rich and the interest groups, and the economic elites and the organized interest groups, are controlled for, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy. I'll tell you what they did. They looked at research from 1981 to 2002, and they looked at what the average citizen thought about the issues, and then what the richest citizens thought about the issues. And they found that no matter, even if there was support from ordinary Americans about making changes with poverty, making changes with other social issues, it made no difference if the change was made. The only time the policy would change is if the richer 2% supported the policy. So, also a quote from the paper, when fairly large majorities of Americans favor policy change, they generally do not get it. And ordinary citizens can win the policies they want only if average citizens and the rich citizens, the affluent citizens, want the same things from government. So I don't have very many good ideas about this, but a question here is how can ordinary citizens get the policy changes they want to fight poverty? I've done a little looking into this, and I found the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Warren Buffett, who have created an independent organization called the Giving Pledge. These people jokingly call themselves the Billionaires Club. And what they're trying to do is they've created an organization where the world's wealthiest individuals are committing to give away half their income during their lifetime or in their will to philanthropic causes. And right now, over 100 individuals have made that pledge. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Facebook, is one of the people who made the pledge. So one of the best ideas that I had for making changes in policy in the United States is appealing to the wealthiest Americans. The richest citizens in the United States are willing to give away half of their income, and so maybe they could provide support to social programs in the United States to reduce poverty. Maybe. So most Americans want to help the deserving poor and think the economic conditions in America right now are unfair. Ordinary Americans have almost no direct control over public policy changes, let alone policy changes to fight poverty. And if Americans are interested in fighting poverty, maybe they could appeal directly to America's most wealthy and willing donors to support public policy to fight poverty. Just some quick final comments here. I hope that doesn't seem too pessimistic. Some information from Angela Lee Duckworth. She's an American psychologist, a Korean-American psychologist, who's done some research on self-control and perseverance. And one of the things that she has found is that she's looked at public school programs, she's looked at military programs, and she's found that the key thing that makes someone successful as opposed to not successful is whether or not they had the self-control to keep on working. And it actually outperforms IQ. You don't have to have a high academic ability to work hard to control yourself. A quote from her, she calls this notion of self-control grit, and she said in a TED Talks that grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future day in, day out. Not just a week, not just a month, but for years. And working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon and not a sprint. So, if American citizens or Korean citizens or citizens in other developed countries would really like to do something to reduce poverty in that country, it might take a long, long time. It might take a really long time to get the kinds of policy programs you want, or to get involved with the right kinds of social organizations to make the changes you want. But that's exactly what it would mean to work hard, persevere, have self-control, and to have grit. Thank you very much.